And so we come to objects. Objects are one of the best things about JavaScript. Everything in JavaScript is an object, except for the simple types: string, number, boolean, null, and undefined. Everything else is an object. JavaScript objects are collections of properties. You might think of this like a hash or hash table. The values of the object properties can be of any type, and there can be as many or as few of them as you like. Objects are declared with the object literal notation, again one of the great features of JavaScript. The object literal notation looks like this example here. As usual, we're obviously declaring a variable myObject. The open curly brackets and close curly brackets define the scope of the object. And here I'm declaring two properties. First value with the value of the string A, and second value with the numeric value 2. There's no class construct in JavaScript, but JavaScript does provide a number of ways for creating new objects from a template and sharing behavior between objects. Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so the very first example here, the simplest thing you can do with an object is just declare a new empty object, because there's nothing between the curly braces that tells JavaScript that we want an empty object. If we then output the result of calling the toString method on that object, all objects have a toString method, we can see the expected output. So it's telling us object and the type is object. Not all that useful so far. To get slightly more complicated, there's an alternative way of creating a new object is to call the new object constructor. You might like this technique because it feels a bit more object oriented. Once we have an object, we can go ahead and just directly add properties straight onto an already existing object. So at the time that it's constructed, Tim is just an empty object, but then we can just go ahead and add a property as if it were already there. And here I'm giving the name property the value timbob, which is a string. If we have a look at the output of tim.name, we get timbob as expected. The real fun starts when we begin to look at object literals. So here I'm declaring an object literal and assigning it to the variable John. It has two properties, name and age, with the values John Blaine and 21. Outputting these properties, John Blaine is the name property, 21 is the age property, and again calling object.toString, we get the same output, just telling us that it is an object. The built-in JavaScript types come with overloads of the toString methods to try to provide more useful output. So for example, if we call toString on an array of numbers, we get a nice string representation of that array of numbers. Similarly, if we call toString on a regular expression, and this is the regular expression literal notation, we get nice friendly output of the regular expression. Again, Boolean objects behave the same way. We get false, a nice string output. And finally, if I call toString on a function, the output is the content of that function. You might remember before that I added a new property to an object by directly assigning to that property even though it didn't exist yet. And I can do the same thing with a function. Although the toString function does exist, Here I'm going to replace it with a new function that's going to give me better output. So in this case, the function will just append together the properties of my John object. And if we call that, we get a much nicer output from our toString method. Another thing that is important to note, when creating objects, there's no limit to the nesting of objects. It's possible to have an object that has a property that contains another object, which in turn may have properties that contain more objects, and so on. One quirk that can throw off beginners is that when using the object literal notation that we've previously discussed, you have to remember that properties are assigned using this colon syntax, not using equals. If you put equals in there, then this will fail.